Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Richard Cruz, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Flight Sergeant Glenn Johnson. We're honoured to acknowledge Lieutenant General Orlando Bautista, Commanding General Philippine Army, and Lieutenant General Angus Campbell, Chief of Army, Australia, and the members of the United States Joint Improvised Threat Defeat Organisation. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors and students on behalf of the following schools. From South Australia, St Peter's Woodlands Grammar School, Glenelg, and from Victoria, Stella Morris Primary School, Beaumaris, and Canberra West Primary School. Could I ask you to please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. Students, you may be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Private Sydney Clyde Batty. Known by his middle name Clyde, Sydney Batty was born on the 15th of January 1900 in Birregurra, Victoria, to Zion and Charlotte Batty. He had an older brother, Albert, and 7 sisters, Amy, May, Ivy, Lavinie, Lily, Grace and Elsie. Sydney's father ran a well-known seaside guest house at Aireys Inlet through the 1890s, but by the time Sydney was born, the family had moved to Barwon Downs. Sydney Batty attended school at Barwon Downs, winning a merit certificate in late 1914 for academic achievement, before working as a mill hand. His older brother Albert enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force in October 1916, but was discharged as medically unfit a month later because of hearing problems that originated from a childhood ear infection. Batty enlisted with the written consent of his parents in January 1918, barely a fortnight after turning 18. After completing initial training, he left Melbourne aboard the troop ship Baramba in late October. During the voyage, he was charged with attempting to steal liquor from the guardroom and was awarded 5 days field punishment number 2. By the time Private Batty reached England in mid-November 1918, the war had ended. After a few months at the first Australian Dermatological Hospital at Bulford, Private Batty headed home, arriving in Melbourne in May 1919. In 1920, Sydney Batty married Elsie May Bell. That year, she gave birth to the couple's first child, Albert, named after Sydney's brother, who had died in an accident a year earlier. The couple lived in Barwon before moving to Geelong and raised a large family. When Australia entered the Second World War in 1939, the age range set for enlistment was 20 to 35. Sydney Batty was by now 40 years old and not eligible to enlist. When the maximum age of enlistment was raised the following year, he wasted no time, enlisting in the 2nd Australian Imperial Force at Geelong on the 14th of June. Batty joined the 2nd 24th Battalion and on the 16th of November left Melbourne on the troop ship Strathmore. He disembarked in the Middle East on the 17th of December, 3 days after his father had died in Australia, and moved into Cyrenaica to complete training. On New Year's Day, Batty was accused of being drunk at his post and disobeying a superior officer. While a district court martial held in February found him not guilty of being drunk, he earned 2 weeks' detention for insubordination. Later in the month, he was charged with being out of bounds, presumably when he should have been in detention. A few months later, Batty was with the 2nd 24th Battalion as it entered Tobruk on the 10th of April. The battalion helped defend the fortress for the next 8 months before transferring to Palestine and Syria for rest and garrison duties. By July 1942, German and Italian forces had reached El Alamein in Egypt, about 110 kilometres from Alexandria. The 9th Division, including the 2nd 24th Battalion, was rushed to the El Alamein area and held the northern sector for almost 4 months as the 8th Army was reinforced for an offensive under a new commander. The orders for the first attack were issued on the 7th of July. The 26th Brigade, of which Batty's battalion was part, advanced along the coast, driving a wedge between the sea and German positions by capturing the feature known as Tel El Isa, which ran between the railway line and the sea. The 2nd 24th Battalion was instrumental in capturing Company 621, a German wireless intercept unit, on the 10th of July 1942, an event that helped change the course of the conflict in Africa. 2 days later, Private Batty was evacuated by field ambulance. He was sent to a rest camp, rejoining his unit after a few days. A week later, in the early morning of the 22nd of July, 2 companies of the 2nd 24th Battalion attacked an area where enemy troops were thought to be located. They captured their objective on schedule, but suffered severely from heavy artillery, mortar and machine gun fire, especially from the flanks. The companies consolidated under intense enemy fire, but were forced to withdraw because of heavy casualties. An estimated 250 casualties were inflicted on the enemy, and 11 prisoners and 5 enemy machine guns were brought back. But the companies suffered about 100 casualties, including at least 20 killed. Among the dead was Private Sydney Batty. He was 42 years old, barely old enough to enlist in the First World War, and initially too old to enlist in the Second World War. Sydney Batty had served in both as soon as he was able. Today, his remains lie in the El Alamein War Cemetery under the words chosen by the family he left behind. A great soldier until the end, loved by all. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, among the almost 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. A photograph of his headstone is displayed beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private Sydney Clyde Batty, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we shall remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Poziere or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes this evening's last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.